He called it shadow casting, keeping his line above water long enough and low enough to make a rainbow rise. And I realized that in the time I was away, my brother had become an artist.
When I was a little bitty baby, my mama would rock me in the cradle in them old cotton field back home. It was down in Louisiana, just about a mile from Texarkana, in them old cotton field back home. When them cotton balls get rotten, you can't need very much cotton in them old cotton field back home. It was down in Louisiana, just about a mile from Texarkana.
G'day everybody, welcome back to episode number 3 of the Predator Podcast. My name's Dean Watt. Yes, I know I sound a bit funny, and no, I'm not from New Zealand. It's been a big couple of weeks for the Predator Podcast. Got everything launched, the website, the Facebook page, and it's been great seeing all the terrific feedback from you guys, and I'm glad you're a part of it. Feel free to write into the Facebook page, send us any questions you want, give us an idea of who you want to hear from, and we'll be happy to chase it up. All the clips are also available on YouTube or direct from SoundCloud. Just search for the name, The Predator Podcast, and you should have no trouble finding them. Also, for a bit of fun this week, if you go to the start of this episode and listen to that clip, if you can identify which movie that clip is from, go to our Facebook page and post your answer. The winner will get a mystery prize straight out of my tackle box. So apart from that, let's get into the episode. And just as promised, it's a Zander fishing special. I'm talking to a man by the name of James Dobie. He recently won the qualifier at Grafham for the World Predator Fishing Championship, where Zander fishing heavily features. He won that with his boat partner Mike Edgar. So we're going to pick his brains all about the Zander, how to catch them, where to find them, and I'm sure it'll help you put a few extra Zs in the boat, or at least put you on the right track. So kick back and enjoy the episode, I'm sure you will, and I'll see you at the other end.
It was down in Louisiana, just about a mile from Texarkana, in them old cotton fields back home. In them old cotton fields back home.
Well, I've put the call out there to find out who is a local resident reservoir Zander fishing expert. It's that time of year when people start turning their attention to the species, and Mr. James Dobie, a lot of people were pointing in your direction. Now, why do you think that is?
I think they're talking rubbish, Dean, to be honest. I've just come back from my 5th blank in a row, and not much expert going on there, unfortunately.
Well, you probably shouldn't have told us that.
Well, everyone goes through bad spells. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
That's right. So how about we start off with you filling everyone in on who exactly you are and how you got started fishing and where it's brought you to these days.
So, obviously, I'm James Dobie. I've been fishing for Zander now predominantly for Zander for 15, 16 years in total. I've been doing the reservoirs for about 5 seasons. The last couple of seasons a lot more seriously. The Zander fishing in general, it's just something I fell into with limited time and going out. You hear all the rumours about Zander, they only feed at night and this sort of stuff. And it just filled in with my schedule quite nicely. So I ended up Zander fishing and then moved into lure fishing about 5 years ago. And yeah, now seem to find all of my free time spent on Grafham more than Rutland.
You picked up Zander fishing because you were working during the day and you figured, well, if the Zander are feeding at night, I may as well get on that.
Yeah, basically, it was just sort of a case of before I started lure fishing, it was just easier to grab a few packs of dead bait out the freezer, and you could just go and sort of set up in the dark and fish in the dark, and it didn't really cause a problem. And then once, I wouldn't say I cracked dead baiting, but once I got proficient, a new challenge was lure fishing, and that's how I've ended up spending thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds on lure fishing tackle.
It's always the way, isn't it? How do you think that idea sort of spread through the fishing community that Zander's only a nighttime thing?
I think to begin with, all of the stuff about the Zander was written by people who were bait fishing for starters and fishing the fens, the fen drains and the fen rivers. And my experience on those is that the fish do feed more at night. And I think a lot of it's to do with depth of water. But
right. Also,
rumours perpetuate. And I can remember people saying you could never catch Zander on lures. And
yeah.
You know, there's loads of Chinese whispers, and I think a lot of the stuff when people first started fishing for Zander was, you know, they're predominantly night feeders, and we all followed on from that. And actually, it's complete rubbish.
Yeah, that's right. If the cranky old grandpas down on the bank are telling you can only catch them at night, just like you can only catch pike on spinners, I guess a lot of people listen to them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listen to them, and then everyone starts doing it as well. And so, obviously, if everyone's fishing for them at night, then they're only going to get caught at night. But now I think it's, as we've gained a bit more understanding and certainly gained a few more methods to fish for them, it's pretty obvious that back then they didn't know as much as we know now, and we've certainly learned a few new tricks.
Yeah, so back when it first got started on those fens drains, I guess it was, even for pike, it would have just been live or dead baits, and that's about the end of it.
I think so. I mean, you look at the boom in lure fishing in this country now. I mean, I've been lure fishing for about 15 years all in, but seriously for about 5. But, 15 years ago, you'd see people chucking out spinners and the odd, Shakespeare Big S and the occasional crankbait, but a serious lure angler was quite rare. Whereas now, everywhere you go, you see, pretty serious lure anglers everywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
In the same way that 15 years ago, there were a lot more people bait fishing for pike and Zander than I see now, actually.
Well, I'm guessing you got dobbed in for the Zander fishing episode of the podcast because you recently had a big win at the World Predator Classic event. So you want to just give us a rundown on how the event worked and what you got up to?
Yeah, the WPC, the qualifier, it was the first time there's been one over here. So me and my mate Mike, we decided 6 months before the event that we were going to get together and have a crack at it. And we've both fished Grafham quite a lot for the last few years. And it's the Zander, in my view, the Zander were the most important, which put me at maybe more of an advantage than some of the guys who fish for perch. So it was a 2-day thing. The first day we had 4 hours on the water practicing, but the weather was really quite bad, and we were restricted to only fishing sort of halfway across the reservoir on the nearest half to where we launched from.
Right. So it was bad for fishing, but not necessarily bad for Zander. Is that what you're saying?
Well, this is the practice day, so we couldn't fish the whole venue, which actually worked in our favour because we knew where we were going to go and practice. Right.
So it's going to rest your fish so no one else is fishing your spot.
Yeah, that's it. It was out of bounds on the first day. And to be honest, on the practice day, I think we might have been the only boat who had Zander anyway. We had a few small ones, and by small, I mean, half a pound. And so having the spots rested for the tournament was really useful. Because I think in other conditions, we wanted it really rough from a selfish point of view, because we've got experience to fishing when it is really rough, and not everyone who was there will have done.
Yep.
And it worked in our favour, really.
So where you caught them on the practice day, you probably weren't necessarily going to fish there at all, were you?
No, it wasn't part of the plan at all. There's a distinct, in my experience on Grafham, which is different to other people, but in my experience, there's a distinct line in the middle of the reservoir, if you like, from as you head down it. And I personally only catch fish on the far side of this line, if you like. And it just so happened that we couldn't fish the far side of the line in the practice. So it kind of worked out quite nicely.
So you were sitting there rubbing your hands together, just watching the wind blow.
Basically, yeah. It was the case of it was quite bad on the Saturday on the first day. It was quite bad. I mean, it was actually worse, I think, on the competition day than it had been the day before, which was the wind. The angle had changed from a southerly to a southwesterly. So on a southwesterly, it's got a long way to sort of generate a head of steam, if you like.
Yeah.
And we were right over the far side, so you're right in the teeth of the wind. And it was, yeah, we were quite excited come Sunday morning when we got there at 9 o'clock. We were like, yeah, this is exactly what we wanted.
So could you just tell me a bit more about the competition, how it works? You obviously had a boat partner. It's a catch and release event. For someone who hasn't been to one of these things before, just give us the details of that and how it all works, and how do you end up being the winner at one of these things?
It's a big fish competition. It's not go and bang out 10 meters of as many fish as you can possibly catch. You've got to submit your best pike, your best 3 perch, and your best 3 zander at the end of the allotted time. So it's only 7 fish.
Yeah.
You hand in, if you like, or your best 7. So your best 3 zander, your best 3 perch, and your best pike. And that's been the case with the WPC in the main event in Holland as well. So the aim is obviously to try and catch the biggest of the species. So there were 2 in a boat. I think there were 28 boats in total. We ended up with 368 centimetres for the 7 fish, which was, yeah, so we had actually, to be honest, the 2 biggest fish we caught was Zander. My boat partner caught both of them. He had a 74 and a 77 centimetre Zander, and I had a 70 centimetre pike, which was quite a fortunate capture, to be honest, because not many came out on the day at all.
So what does a 70 centimetre Zander weigh?
Well, that's the big question for everyone who hates measuring fish. Since I went out to Holland, me and a friend went out sort of 18 months ago, and they only really 99.9% of the anglers in Holland measure fish. They don't weigh them at all.
Yeah.
So when we were out there, we started measuring the fish and we started weighing them as well, because we were catching some big Zeds in Holland. And since we've come back, I've continued to measure them and to weigh them as well, because I just find it quite interesting. But there can be a huge discrepancy between a fish of the same weight. The length discrepancy could be massive. To put it into perspective, I had a 10-pound, 14-ounce Zander in September, which was 83 centimetres long.
Yep. I
had a 10-pound, 14-ounce Zander in the same place last January, and that was only 70 centimetres long. So it's what does a 70 centimetres Zander weigh is how long is a piece of string. Because there's just no defined answer.
What did those 2 from the competition weigh, the 2 biggest?
So to be honest, we didn't weigh them on the day, because we were incredibly focused in just getting the fish in the boat first and foremost, getting the measuring and the photographs done, then get the fish back, and then start fishing again. I mean, they were both double figures Zander, I would say. I mean, I've caught quite a few doubles now. They were both double figures Zander, or very, very close to if they weren't. But in terms of an actual figure, we never weighed them because we had other things going on.
Well, there you go. That's what we need to hear. Double figures, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, well, there'll always be someone who turns around and says, "Oh, you never weighed it, so you can't say it was a double or not." And it's fair enough, but it was there or thereabouts.
Yeah. Well, I come from a country where, God, I can't even remember weighing fish as a kid. And when I started fishing very seriously and professionally up in the north of Australia, my father came up after a couple of years, and we'd say, "Oh yeah, that fish is 83 and this one's 76." And he'd say, What do they weigh? What do they weigh? And it's like, why on earth would you want to know that?
It's a really interesting point.
if it ate a fish that was 5 pounds 2 minutes ago, it completely throws it out of whack.
Well, this is the Dutch argument, and I understand it from I understand it from the British point of view as well. I was actually the fellow I was on the boat with the other day when I spoke to you before. He was absolutely, we must weigh the fish, and I was like, fine. I didn't actually have a tape measure with me, so I couldn't measure it, but he was saying exactly the same thing. It's just like, it's a big fish. It's not long, but it's heavy. Like that, which is the more true measurement. If something is, as you say, you've got a big fish which is just eating something heavy, it's not a fair representation potentially, because the length can't change, but the weight does, which is the Dutch way of thinking.
It does change from venue to venue as well. There's the river systems I was fishing in, you'd have some rivers where the fish are long and sleek and skinny, but they're very long. But other places they're stocky and brutal fighting, and it's a totally different ball game. But I think I'm going to put my neck out there and say I'm a measuring man.
Since getting into the habit of doing it, mostly, it's better for the fish, I think, because it's quicker. Certainly when you're on a boat in rough conditions, you're not trying to get a settled reading on the scales. You put it on a mat with a tape measure. It's 70 centimeters. Excellent. Back it goes. As opposed to watching people try and weigh a fish.
Yep.
Certainly on Grafham, I've seen some calamities, to be honest, of people trying to weigh fish in rough conditions. And they're doing more harm than good to the fish, that's for sure, trying to get an accurate reading. Because, bringing fish up from deep water, it doesn't do the Zander any good at the best of times. And then, mucking around trying to make sure you've got it to the ounce, I don't think it's particularly a good idea in some circumstances.
That's right, especially with competitions. It's pretty hard to fake a measurement when the organisers give you a measuring board compared to, say, when you're weighing a fish in a sling, and there's always going to be discrepancies of if the sling was wet or if they felt like winning that little bit more than everyone else, and they chuck a few sinkers in there in the sling with it. And, it's how it's done in the rest of the sport fishing world. So I say, let's measure fish.
Yeah, I must say I'm in complete agreement with basically all of that. But then I'm not normally a competition angler. So people who do fish competitions and weigh fish on a regular basis would know better than me. I'm probably not given a fair representation there.
The World Predator Classic, measuring your top 2 or 3 fish, did you say?
So top 3 Zander, top 3 perch, and single biggest pike.
Okay. Yeah, well, I seem to agree with that quite a bit more than the total accumulative length of things like some of the other competitions you see, and there's people catching 57 perch of about 4 inches long, and they just sit there in the one spot all day and clean them out. And so someone catches a metre pike and it doesn't even matter.
It's a really interesting one, because I know that in the UK we are miles behind, catching up quick, but miles behind the rest of Europe in lure angling competition. Some of the ones in Europe do where you can get a point for a particular size of fish, but you can only catch a certain amount of them, and then you've got to move on to catching fish of a bigger size. And I think that's got some merit. But it's venue dependent though. I fished some venues sort of on the river near me where if you had to try and catch 3 perch, 3 Zander and a pike, you couldn't do it because they're just not very good venues, to be honest. And so 20 perch, 25 perch, it probably is sort of a true test of angling ability, because if that's all there is to catch, and you can try and catch the most of them. But I think there needs to be a mix. Sort of, I'm not into, wasping, if you like, drop shotting with small baits. It's just not how I fish. It's not really my cup of tea. But if I had to fish like that to win a competition, I'd probably do it. I'd fail spectacularly, but I'd probably give it a go.
It sounds more like match angling to me.
Yeah, it is a little. But it's always the argument I have with people. Is it a better sort of show of angling skill to catch 50 small perch or 1 pike? It's hard to call.
Yeah, well, if you want to be on the front page of a fishing magazine because you won a tournament and you've got a picture of yourself with 50 small perch or 1 metre long pike, I think I know what I'd rather.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
We better get back on the Zander since you're a reservoir expert. That's why I've got you on here. The time of year that you were fishing the WPC event that you won, what were the Zander doing at that stage? What part of their life cycle is that? I don't know anything about them, so you've got to educate me.
So it's quite an interesting one because the WPC was in August, towards the end of August, when Grafham isn't open for predator fishing at all, apart from fly fishing. You can't lure fish until the 1st of September. So there's a lot of guesswork is going on as to where the fish might be, because fishing for them at this time of year, then they're deep, they're not moving very quick, you know. But in the summer, we were catching the majority of our fish in about 18 foot of water, whereas the fish I'm trying to catch at the moment were sitting in about 60 foot. So it's a very different ball game, if you like, because there's so much prey spread out all over the reservoir that the Zander are likely to be basically anywhere.
Okay.
And an 1,800 acre reservoir, if the fish are in 18 feet deep water, I mean, that's basically the entire circumference of the reservoir. So it's hard to say what they're really doing, but I think the warmer water, I just think they're more active, and so it was quite an active way of fishing to try and find them.
You must have had a bit of an idea before you went out there. Did you formulate a bit of a game plan the night before, and did you stick to it once you were out there?
Well, I'll be honest, Dean, we formulated a game plan about 6 months before, and my boat partner Mike, we used to talk quite a bit before that 6 month period, and then suddenly we're on the phone every day, and our gear was ready to rock and roll by about mid-June. And yeah, we had a game plan of areas which we've caught on quite well in September, and it was also basically on the peak of the wind, so we didn't think too many people would go to the particular spot that we went to. We were like, right, Mike's got a bow mount motor which we can put on the boat, so that's actually a GPS anchor as well. So we had quite
spot lock. Yeah,
spot locking, exactly. Yeah, so we had a few different ideas planned for what to do, and it turned out on the day that, without being incredibly arrogant, we'd won the tournament by 10:15, and we left the boat lodge at 9, and we were the last boat to get to the fishing grounds because we had more equipment than pretty much everyone else put together, to be honest.
Well, you can afford to be arrogant because you got the trophy.
Well, yeah, there is that, I suppose, but it was just a case of, as you say, we made a plan, we stuck to the plan, and we basically just made a good decision every time it came to making a decision, whatever that might be, and it just worked in our favour, really.
Were the fish turned on, or was it hard going?
It's really interesting. If you ever look at the results online, there's people who didn't weigh in at all to people who weighed in with limited length of fish. Some people only caught one species. It's hard to say, really. I mean, we went to this particular area, and there were 3 boats. There was myself and Mike, and the guys who finished second. 2 of the boats went straight there, if you like. And in the first drift, we must have had 5 Zander between the 2 boats plus a few perch. And the second drift was the same, the third drift was the same, and then we turned around and pretty much every other boat in the competition was in a line behind us, as we'd made it a little bit obvious that we'd been catching a few fish, I think.
Too much yahooing.
There was one particular moment of celebration when we had the pike in the boat that, in hindsight, was a bad decision, because we sort of lost it a little bit then, because the pike was the 7th fish. We'd caught 3 Zander, we'd caught 3 perch, and we knew the pike would be the hardest to catch, and it was a bit of a fluke. It was fished for, but it was a strange occurrence, and the pike ended up in the boat at sort of 10:15, and me and Mike did sort of go a little bit loopy at that point. Yeah, it was a wild celebration for about 30 seconds before we realised if we didn't move, we were going to crash into the bank. So,
all right. And by the time you finished celebrating, everyone knew where you'd caught the fish.
Well, it's a known area for the guys who fish Grafham regularly. It's a known area for Zander, especially, and it all depended really on how people sort of set up, if they wanted to do the perch first or the Zander first, or try and catch the pike first and then try and catch the other species. Me and Mike decided that we would get the greatest length from the three Zander, so we thought we'd do the Zander first, and it just so happened that the Zander and the perch were just coexisting, or the Zander were hunting the perch, because it was just bang, 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 and I was catching perch, Mike was catching Zander from about the first 2-3 minutes of fishing, and that went on for almost the whole competition. And the guys who finished second, James Gardner and Andy Blasey, they were doing the same. They actually were drifting a slightly different angle to us, and they came in behind us and had 2 Zanders straight away before we'd caught a fish, and we were a little bit worried at that point.
Well, there you go. Mike's pulling his weight too. Good on you, Mike.
Mike was brilliant on the day, to be honest. We had about even numbers of fish, and getting 2 double figures Zander in a competition, you can't really argue that.
Let's say if you had a month holiday from work, you could forecast the weather pretty well. What would be your ideal days when you go out there? Do you like it windy? Do you like it high pressure? Do you like a low pressure? What sort of thing turns you on?
High pressure turns me off. We found this year high pressure has seen results really, really plummet. No idea why.
You can tell us anything and we'll believe it. So
I wouldn't. 6 blanks in a row. I wouldn't believe anything which comes out of my mouth. I think perfect conditions would be foggy or overcast, a gentle southwesterly or a westerly wind, and not too warm would be a late October day, basically, would be, I think, the ideal conditions, depending on the style of fishing.
Yeah.
High pressure, really, really strong winds. They do tend to make it a bit more difficult to present baits effectively or to find the fish. At the moment, we've just come off the back of a month of easterly winds, and I've been sitting there scratching my head trying to find these Zander because I cannot find them anywhere.
Yeah, right. That time of year, hey? The silly season.
Yeah, I was out there yesterday, and I looked down at the bottom of the boat by about 11:15. I'd used 35 different lures, and it really was the silly season. And my boat partner had used 2, and at that point we'd caught the same amount of fish. So neither of us were doing something right, I think.
Well, we better let everyone know that it hasn't been exactly normal weather conditions at the moment. I know up here where I am, it's we've had the temperature crashed for about a week and a half straight of below zero. I'm up in Fife in Scotland, and now it's been over 10 degrees every day the last close to 2 weeks, so it doesn't seem normal.
No, we've had the same here. We had it sort of -5 in the mornings, and now it's, I was out. My mate picked me up yesterday morning at 6:30, and I was standing outside in a t-shirt because it's just not cold. And maybe that's half the problem. Maybe they do need a sort of settled period of weather where, certainly a settled period of temperature.
Yeah.
It might make a bit of a difference. Or I could just be really good at making excuses.
Well, that's what we do, mate. If it's not the wind, it's the temperature. And if it's not the temperature, it's the time of year. And if it's not the time of year, it's a point in their life cycle.
And if it's not that, then the thousands of pounds we've all spent on lures over the last few years, we've got to blame the lures, haven't we? Yeah.
So whenabouts does Zander spawn? Is it the same as the other coarse species around here, or what's the go?
I believe they spawn a similar type of perch. So after pike, I think they spawn in about April sort of time, before the rest of the general course species. But they've got quite a long. I think they've got a 6-week spawning period. Is the shortest length of time. It goes on for quite a while.
Yeah.
So certainly on Grafham, we don't have the ability to fish for them after the end of January because it's closed. So I think they actually probably get quite a peaceful time to spawn on there.
Yeah.
Because no one's targeting them at all.
Well, that's probably why there's so many of them.
Are there? All right, yeah. Can you tell them that next time I go down there?
So for a person who's a complete Gumby when it comes to Zander fishing, such as myself, can you just run us through the basic gear that you need to get you started on the big reservoirs?
Don't go crazy and buy hundreds of different lures. That's my best bit of advice, and it's really hard not to do, because you hear all of these things about this person was catching on this lure and this person was catching on this lure, and they might be, but the best thing, 6'6" is my preferred length of rod, very fast actioned, small fixed ball, some very, very good braid. That is the key.
Yep.
Good braid is the most important part of my setup. And then 30, 40 gram jig heads. I tend to use 30 if I can, because I prefer it and it's just easier. But if you're new to it, 40 gram jig heads are a good starting point. Heavier is not always bad. And then just a few lures, a bit of fluorocarbon for a trace. Probably won't want to go into the whole wire versus fluorocarbon debate. Otherwise we could be here all night. But that's really, you don't need too much. The braid's the most important thing by a country mile. The next best thing is going with someone who knows what they're doing. So don't go with me at the moment. But no, a boat partner who's been before is worth his weight in gold.
Yeah, that's right. Especially if you're hiring boats and paying your ticket and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and also someone who's done it before will have a fish finder, and they are pretty essential at times, to be honest.
Or instead of going with someone who knows what they're doing, just listen to this podcast and you'll be a bloody Zander expert by the end of it, and they'll be jumping in the boat.
Well, let's hope so. If I can make one person catch a Zander, I'll be happy.
So you were saying that the braid's really important. Do you go for the 8 carrier braid? What I mean is you can get braid that's, I think they sort of braid it or plait it with 3 strands, or the more expensive stuff is 8 strands, and that's a lot smoother and more supple and cuts through the water a lot better. Do you go that far?
Yeah, that's what most of us are using now. It's 8 strand. I believe it's 8 strand. It's called YGK G Soul, and I'm pretty sure it is 8 strand. And a few people have started using it, and it makes a difference that you wouldn't believe until you see it.
Yeah,
it's so smooth and so fine, and still got reasonable breaking strain. But the diameter is by far and away the most important thing. Yeah,
that's right. The lower strand braids, like I think they're 3 or 4 anyway. But there, if you're in amongst the snags and you need something really tough and brutal, and it's what people use on the pelagics like GTs and stuff, but even estuary species where you're fishing amongst snags. But when you're doing long drop vertical jigging, the 8 strands to go, nice and thin, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the stuff we're using is 0.06 or 0.08, or sorry, 0.6 or 0.8 PE. There's all sorts of difficulties with what the actual millimeters, if you like, are with PE rating, and it's really, really hard to get into. But the only bit of tackle plugging I will do, if you like, is that YGK G Soul. If I could only use one braid again for the Zander fishing, it'd be that.
Right, okay. I'll write that down. What pound rating does that have on it?
0.6 PE. The 0.6 PE, it's 14 pound breaking strain, which is, it's plenty. I mean, there's not many snags in the reservoirs really, and the snags that you do have, you're not going to get off them with heavy line anyway.
Yep.
So if you're on top of the fish and you can play them, £14 is ample, even for a big pike, as long as you've got time and space to play the fish. You don't really need super heavy stuff.
Yeah, that's right. If they're not diving under weeds and snags and stuff, you can afford to go pretty light, and it makes your presentation a lot nicer, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, it makes it a lot more vertical if there's a bit of a wind using a braid like that. But conversely, I wouldn't go any lighter than it either, because there's been instances on the reservoirs this year of people drop shotting with £6 braid. And I understand it for the perch, but when you've got double figures and a £20 pike and what have you, using £6 braid and lures is probably a little bit irresponsible.
And I just don't like losing that many lures. Like £6, I'll go down to that for trout and stuff, but I just can't stand losing that many lures. As soon as you get snagged up, you just either lucky and ping them off, or you snap them off.
Yeah, it's that, exactly. It's not the most resilient, but also you've got to play fish that much harder. And certainly in the summer, when the water temperatures are high, playing fish longer than you need to because you're using inappropriate equipment, it's a bit of a non-starter for me, to be honest. It's one of those things that I don't know where you can start and stop with fish welfare when you're a fisherman, but doing something which is probably going to cause harm if you do hook a big fish seems to be a bit self-defeating, really.
God, let's not get into that either. First we were talking about measuring fish, and now we're going to talk about how light is too light. So we'll just we'll leave the controversy behind. That's right. This isn't a Facebook forum. We don't want arguments. You've got your £16 braid, and then go down to a fluorocarbon trace. How heavy is your fluorocarbon, and what knot do you use to connect those two?
This is an interesting one, because I know a lot of people who tie the braid direct to the fluoro using something like a 4-term water knot or an Albright knot or things like that. I use a swivel.
All right.
Because fundamentally I'm quite lazy. But also I've seen braid to fluoro knots go more than once to boat partners.
Yeah.
In fact, more than a handful of times all in.
And you can name some names if you want who can't tie knots.
I would do, but he might never speak to me again. So it's one of those that I just use a Palomar to a swivel, and then I use £27 fluoro as the leader, and then I still haven't found the perfect clip. But at the moment, I'm using a size 2 fast hatch. A lot of guys are tying the jig heads on now, which I think's probably got a bit of merit. But I change lures far too often. I'd be changing my trace every hour.
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, those fast hatch are the way to go. But yeah, you don't think the Zander are too fussy if they see a swivel bobbing around or a clip attached to the lure?
It's an interesting one. I think on some occasions it might be the case. I think if you're in really clear water on the rivers and stuff, or in shallow water and they can see it, it might cause an issue. But let's face it, if you've got a 40-gram jig head sitting there, that's a big lump of lead. Are they really going to be that fussy about an inch-long clip?
You're probably right there. What sort of lures do you favour on Grafham then? Give us maybe, well, you can give us brands if you want, but what sort of styles?
For the Zander, if it's rough, slim, split tail baits, Western slim tees, Lunker City finesse fish, or Megabass X layers, pintails. They're what I go to if it's rough, because they less resistance on the lure as you're going through the water. Split tails are what I've caught more on the last couple of years, but before that I was using paddle tails all the time. And I mean, there's a million paddle tails on the market you could use, and to be honest, I think I used 30 odd lures the other day because I wasn't particularly confident. I'll be honest, I wasn't very confident, but in the main, the lure probably doesn't make that much difference. 60 foot down, if you're moving at the right sort of speed, I don't think the lure is the most crucial bit of vertical jigging for Zander.
Right, so you just got to get it in front of them first and think about the rest later.
Get it in front of them first, present it correctly are the two key elements in my view. I don't think there's a right way of vertical jigging because I fish in a particular way, boat partners fish in a particular way. The guys, James Gardner and Andy Lush, who really are the two masters on Grafham and Rutland, they fish a lot more aggressively than I do. And yet they catch bucket loads of fish. I've tried fishing like that and I can't catch anything. So I don't think there's a right way of doing it. But if you're lifting and jerking your lure around loads and loads and loads and loads, in my view, that's probably wrong for Zander.
Right.
Might get perch, might get pike on it, but lifting your lure around like it's having a seizure is definitely not the way to go for Zander.
Okay, well, expand on that. What would you do for your retrieves or for your jigging style?
Almost nothing. Genuinely. Almost nothing.
Yeah.
I find, if you ever read any of the literature about it, people say you get the Zander hits on the fall as it's going back towards the bottom. And I think that's true to an extent, but I get 75% of my hits when I'm doing absolutely nothing. I've just lifted the lure up and I'm holding it. It's not going up, it's not going down. It's just there, sort of 3 inches off the bottom, and bang. That's how I get the majority of my hits when I'm vertical jigging. The hardest thing to do is to do very little.
Yeah.
Especially when it's slow. The temptation is to give it a twitch and what have you. And I think do nothing. It catches fish. It's weird, but you know, a lot of us, we fish two rods. We fish a dead rod, and the dead rod, drop it down and leave it there. And I'll probably catch as many fish on the dead rod as I do on the live rod, if not more.
Yeah, right. Dead sticking it. So do you try anything like maybe adding skirts to your lures or scent or something? So even if it is being dead sticked, it's still got a little bit of motion or a little bit of attraction, or you think visual sort of stimulus is enough for them?
Last season, I was using Trigger X on everything scent. I was using it on the whole works. So I was convinced it made the difference until I went out one day and forgot the Trigger X and I caught loads of fish. I think there's always debates about scent and what have you, and how much of it's confidence for the angler, how much of it does make a difference. I mean, I was out in Holland pelagic fishing for the Zander and we were catching nothing, and I tried this particular scent, dropped it on the lure, dropped the lure down, put it on a fish's face, bang, 15 pound Zander comes in the boat. Did the scent make a difference? Maybe. Maybe not. Who knows? Maybe the fish just decided it was sick and tired of this thing sitting in its face and just decided to eat it. The one thing I do more than anything else, though, is rattles.
All right.
Little glass rattles, or buy lures with rattles in, like the Megabass X Slayers have got rattles in already. I think it makes a bit of a difference on certain days. Yeah, that's my little attractor.
There's not a lot of light getting down to the depth of Grafham, I wouldn't think. So a rattle's going to travel further than the Zander can see.
I would guess so. Yeah, I mean, I think at the bottom of Grafham, I doubt there's very much water movement at all. So,
or just light.
Or light, and exactly. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, 60 foot down, I guess it's pretty dark, pretty cold, and then suddenly something which goes click clack as it goes through the water. The idea is that they would be able to home in on it. Then again, if the stuff written about Zander in the past about the night feeding is true, 60 feet down at Grafham when it's dark, they're going to be able to see potentially, or see more than we would at that depth anyway.
Million miles for every year that you went away, 1,000 long winters to know where you lay. I barely remember the soldier who left me alone on the docks to serve the king in his country. You're a story untold to me, a name and a face, a black and white picture above a fireplace. Cross to bear just to know where you lay. Heave away, haul away, please come back to me someday. Soldiers returned, I remember the day. Held mother's hand and I saw the parade. Schoolyard, the Christmas, the birthdays alone. These are the times that I've faced on my own. You're a story untold to me, a name and a face. Black and white picture above a fireplace. Cross to bear just to know where you lay. So heave away, haul away, please come back to me. Heave away, haul away. I hope you come back to me someday. I've been waiting for the wind to blow, saying heave away, haul away, please come back home. A million miles for every year that you went away. Rest in the green fields where you lay. I'd yearn for the father that I'd never known, and sing heave away, haul away, please come back home.
So there's a few species I know of where the fall rate of the lure is really important. Do you think that's part of it when you're vertical jigging, how fast the lure falls through the water?
Yeah, 100%. It's really interesting. There was a video on Sky Sports 6 months or so ago about the main World Predator Classic in Holland. And the guys who won it had been casting for the Zander and using 10-gram jig heads. And they had a little chat in the boat, changed the tackle, cast out again, bang, bang, both caught a Zander very quickly. And they were asked what they'd done differently. And they'd changed from a 10-gram to a 14-gram head and fished it a bit quicker. And it worked. And I think there's certainly an element to that on Grafham as well. If you're using 30-gram heads, you can control the speed yourself, or you can let it do it naturally. And there are certain days they definitely want it faster, or indeed slower. And that's generally the days, if they want a slower retreat, a slower fall is generally the days I'll put a paddle tail on, because it slows it down anyway.
Oh, okay. Get a bit of a thump behind it.
Yeah, and just the natural resistance in the tail, a bit more vibration, or how much vibration there is going through it, sort of 0.4 miles an hour is negligible, I guess, but I'm sure they can feel something down there. But it definitely makes the drop slower than it would do if you're using a split tail.
Yeah, they know things that we don't know. I'm sure in 60 foot of water in the pitch black, they can see and feel little water beetles and things swimming around them, no worries. What do you think that you and Mike did differently to the rest of the field when you won your competition?
Well, the first thing we did differently in terms of results was catch a pike. I believe of the 28 boat anglers and the 20-odd kayak anglers, I think only half a dozen pike were caught in total. There really weren't very many. And so catching the pike was, it was something we did differently because we were fortunate enough to stick a hook in one. And I think that was really, it was that and location, going to the spots first where we decided to fish. There were only 3 boats there to start with. And there were 20 boats there, plus probably 15 kayaks by the end of the day. So we got there first. We caught the fish immediately before anyone else had really had a chance to hammer the spot. And that was, to be honest, that was the biggest thing. That was the biggest thing in the competition. Get to the right area. Doesn't matter how well you're fishing if the fish aren't there, does it? After all.
That event was a qualifying event. So where will that take you next?
So we've got the main event in Holland in June of next year. I think the event starts on about the 20th. We've got a couple of days practice on the venue first, and then 3 days for the competition. But me and Mike, being really organised, or really quite competitive, to be honest, we're going out the 10th of June, and we're going to have a week's worth of guiding first, just to
brilliant.
Well, just so we don't embarrass ourselves, I think that's the biggest thing. We don't want to go and finish last, basically.
Well, yeah, it's a smart thing to do, mate. I'd definitely be getting as many tips as I could. Do Do you know if you're going to be fishing against the guide?
No, I think, thankfully, he's not a competitive angler, so he's got no reason not to give us all of his best spots, hopefully. Unless somebody else is paying him off.
Just don't tell him what you're up to.
Yeah, I think it's he's guided in the past teams who've done quite well, which is why we've picked him. He's one of the guys, I think they finished third either last year or the year before, one of the guys who used him before the tournament. So he came quite well recommended. So it's a 27-mile long competition venue. So to go out there with no guiding and no practice, it's basically a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, that's right. I've had a bit of a look at the competition page before and some of the stuff they've got on YouTube, and it looks like a crazy place to fish, and it's going to be a lot to take in with all the $80,000 boats flying around and all the professional teams. But I'm sure you'll do us proud, mate.
Well, fingers crossed. That's all I can say is if we go out and we don't embarrass ourselves, I'll be a very happy man.
Well, for all the fishing nerds out there listening, we better talk about what sounder you've been using for this kind of fishing.
So, fish finders. Oh, the perennial debate, Humminbird or Lawrence? That's always the first question.
That doesn't fucking matter, does it?
Well, you'd be surprised. I'm a Lawrence guy. I have been for a couple of years now. I'll be honest, and it's going to sound like I'm making this up, but the minute I changed from a Humminbird to a Lawrence, my catch rate went through the roof.
The first time I ever used one of the new generation Lawrences, and just on the basic settings, it's like, oh shit, there's 4 fish over there. Yeah,
I mean, in fairness to Humminbirds, the one I had before my Lawrence wasn't as good, so I wasn't going to see as much as I'm seeing on my current finder. But it's a different kettle of fish entirely. From the minute we were actually in Holland on the competition venue. Me and a friend were doing some Zander fishing out there, guided, and the guy had them on his boat, and you could just see the difference to what we had at home. And it was like, right, and we know what we need to buy now. So I've got a Gen 2 Lawrence 7-inch, and it's a cracking bit of kit. I'd like a 9 or a 12-inch, but I can't really justify it for the money.
What pages do you have up while you're doing your reservoir Zander fishing? Do you go for a high kilohertz rate or a low one, or down scan? How do you set it up?
So I've got the standard 2D sonars 3/4 of my screen, because often I'm watching what my lures are doing. So 200 kilohertz as well, because 83 wide beam, you're not really sure if what you're seeing is directly underneath you, whereas 200, what you see is pretty close to the transducer in a vertical line from the transducer. It's pretty close. It's a narrow cone. That I don't use the maps. I don't use the side scan too much, only on sort of a rare occasion. I have the down scan up more than most, but in the main, I'm not a technological kind of guy, and I just want to see my sonar and see what's going on down there. I'm not fussy about 3D. I'm not fussy about side scan. I'm not fussy about maps. I'm not that fussy about GPS more often than not. There comes a point where you spend too much time looking at your finder instead of actually fishing. And I've fallen into that trap, and I know others have. And they're good, but a finder's never struck for you and wound a fish up and put it in the boat. Do you know what I mean? So there's a limit to what you want. It's to talk to someone who's never done it before. A fish finder is essential, but so is everything else in terms of technique and location. The fish finder will help you find fish, but if you're still fishing like a moron, you're not going to catch them.
Well, like a proper Zander wanker, do you have the transducer on the side of the boat where you're jigging?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a proper Zander wanker in that respect. Yeah, get as close to the transducer as possible. Depends though. It's like I watch what my lures are doing quite a lot on the screen, and it's quite interesting in a way to see how far actually you're moving the lure off the bottom and stuff like that, or how far off the bottom the fish are sometimes, and having the transducer right underneath, or right over the top of your bait, you do sort of get a better picture than if it's on the back of the boat and you're on a narrow beam. What's actually under the transducer there might not be under where your lures are if you're going at a funny angle on the wind and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see how the fish actually react to the way you're working your bait as well. I've seen some of the stuff from Europe where they're searching out the larger fish that are actually high in the water column, and they're using their sounder where the Zander are actually acting like a pelagic fish. Is that something you have ever done over here?
Well, we've done it, me and Ian, a mate of mine, and we've done a bit of it in Europe ourselves. And we've tried to do it over here. But if you look at the guys in Sweden and in Holland, one of the main things is they're using the engine to control exactly their speed. And you look at it, sometimes you can see it on the finders on the YouTube videos, and they're doing 0.0 miles an hour. And unfortunately, on the Grafham and Rutland and places like that, we're not allowed to fish with the engines on. So when you're drifting along and you turn the engine on, someone, usually a trout fishing expert who's got no idea about predator fishing at all, will phone up and say you're trolling. Even if you're actually not going anywhere. No, these blokes are trolling. No, I'm not, mate. I'm holding position. But apparently they can't tell the difference. So we have tried it over here. And with some success, but the bigger difference between what you see online and what you see in Grafham is the fact Grafham's got 50,000 trout in it.
Yeah.
And those waters haven't. And knowing what's a Zander sort of in mid-water, your guess is as good as mine. You know what I mean? It's like, I think, that might be a Zander. I'll put a lure in its head, and then nothing happens, or it follows it for a little while and nothing. And you're just like, well, was that a Zander? Was it a trout? Was it a bream?
Yeah, dancing around the maypole, chasing your tail all day.
Precisely. And that is where the fish finders start to work against you. That is the one thing. If you've got a really all singing, all dancing fish finder and you're spending loads of time trying to interpret what's going on the screen, you're probably not fishing as well as you could be. And I've certainly fallen into that trap. It's just like, if I can't get the finder working, it makes me a very grumpy man, and my fishing suffers for it.
Yeah.
And that's it's one of those things you just don't really think about. But electronics go wrong. And when they go wrong, and if you're reliant on them, you're buggered, basically. As I found out to my cost the other morning, when my GPS wouldn't work and my finder wouldn't work and my transducers wouldn't connect. And it's like, shit. Okay, what am I going to do now? Get on the phone to Ian, who knows everything there is to know about Lawrence gear, and he sorted it out. But that was an hour of the day where I really didn't fish very well because I had the strop, basically.
Yeah. Well, on these big reservoirs, how do you find that the rules that they impose on you affect you? Obviously, do they have a problem with spot lock and that sort of stuff? It must just drive you bananas, does it?
I'll be honest, on Grafham, Mike's got an engine with spot lock on it. And I think he's the only person I've ever seen on there with a bow mount. That particular rule, it's not something which has affected us, but they're fighting a losing battle, Grafham, in a way. I was talking to the guys yesterday, and their rules, they can't enforce, but they need to enforce them, and they're aware that they need to enforce them, but there's not enough people there to necessarily enforce all of the rules all the time, so the rules get broken. So it's a really difficult one, because they put in rules in the past which have been designed by pike anglers, which really hinder the Zander fishing, for example.
Yeah,
so, and I'll be honest, all of the Zander guys ignored them, and the staff at Grafham were aware that the Zander guys were ignoring them, because the Zander guys are the ones bringing in the revenue. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about for them. They want to make as much money off the predator fishermen as possible, because it's not costing them anything, and I don't blame them for that at all. So they're quite understanding, but at the same time, no you got to use wire for Zander when vertical jigging. Well, that one went out the window a little while ago because, in my view, it's a difference. And in the view of the guys who are really good at vertical jigging, if they say it makes a difference, then I don't think anyone should really argue with them, personally, because they know what they're doing. Like James Gardner, for example, I mean, I think he could catch fish out of a bucket, to be honest. But if he says using wire for vertical makes a difference, then who's anyone else to argue with him? Because he's probably caught more Zander on the method than anyone else in the country.
It drives me nuts when I'm looking for new fisheries up here, especially in Scotland, and just on Google Earth, and you're researching all these fisheries, and this one's fly fishing only, and this one's fly fishing only. It's because the rules were written 20 years ago. I think public consultation, and quite often, is the way to go, to change with the times, change with the methods, and change how your revenue stream's going to come in.
Well, I think you're totally right, Dean. I mean, if you look at it now, fly fishing's in the decline, and it has been for a while. And the guys I see on Grafham trouting, I mean, they're a lot older than the guys I see lure fishing. That's probably the nicest way to put it. I mean, I'm 31, and I don't see many people my age fly fishing on Grafham.
Yeah,
I see a lot of people my age, younger, older, lure fishing. Don't see many of them fly fishing anymore. And I imagine that's probably the case where you are as well. It's sort of on its way down, or lure fishing's more on its way up than fly fishing is on its way down. I would say. It's
right.
probably, and so all of the venues are going to have to change, because if they need the money and the lure fishermen are prepared to spend the money, then they'd be idiots to refuse it, really.
That's right. If there's more lure fishermen, then lure fishermen have the money. If you want to impose something like a single hook rule to keep in step with your fly fishing for your fish welfare, I guess that's possible. But bloody hell, if one of these fly fishing venues up here said, okay, you can come on and lure fish, but you have to use a single hook, I'd be there in an instant, and I'd open my wallet to them every weekend.
Well, that's it. I mean, Grafham has sort of said that about, they tried to they banned treble hooks this year. Now, that's a bizarre one, because they sell flies in the shop which have got treble hooks on.
You're joking.
So, and they sell lures in the shop which have got treble hooks on. So it's sort of a bit of a mixed message there. Or it's certainly lures without, you can use a treble hook if you're using wire, but not if you're using fluorocarbon. It's a really interesting one, because I mean, I've been around Zander fishing and predator fishing for 20 odd years now, and in my complete heart of hearts, I have never come across a pike dead with a lure in it, ever. And I've asked this question a million times, and I have never ever seen anyone turn around and said they've got a lure, not a crankbait. I'm not talking about a crankbait with two sets of trebles in it. I'm talking about a vertical jigging lure on fluoro. Doesn't happen. Yeah, we get bitten off, and I'm the first person to admit that. I get bitten off. But I've been bitten off when sight casting to fish and caught the fish 30 seconds later, and it's not got the lure in it. They can get rid of them. And if it was causing a major problem, then I'd say, yeah, it's an issue. But it's acceptable risk. And until someone proves to me that these fish are actually suffering from potential treble hooks, I'd say we're a bit picky again on which bits of fish welfare we want to promote and which bits of it we really want to ignore. And it's a really sticky situation.
I've only been over here, close to 3 years now, and I've asked the odd person, and I've seen the fluoro wire debate and all the rest of that crap. But just in random posts on Facebook and what have you, and it's like, oh yeah, I found a pike with a trace in it today, and a trace in it today, and a trace in it today, and no one ever finds them with a lure in their mouth. But there you go. We'll get you back, James, for an opinion piece when we do a whole episode on this bullshit.
Oh, I love the controversy. Yeah, don't get me started on bait anglers.
We'll do a 3-way chat with a dedicated bait angler, and we'll get you on with a fly fisherman as well, and you can just scream at them.
I tell you what, you also need to get a guy. You need to get a guy who fishes these big jerk baits for the pike. the big crankbaits with the 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 treble on them, and get them to explain to me how that's absolutely fine and what I'm doing isn't. Because you're sticking a treble hook in which weighs as much as the lure I'm using, but that's fine. We're a special kind of people fishermen, I think.
All right, let's get back to the original subject. With your sounder, when you're seeing Zander on these big reservoirs, do they look like the typical fish arches, or do they hug the bottom really closely a lot of the time, or how does it work?
A lot of the fish that we're fishing for with vertical jig are hugging the bottom. So you've got like an arch, but very, very, very close to the bottom. I'm led to believe that the Gen 3 Lawrences have got the chirp facility, and that shows a bit better bottom separation from these arches. I haven't used one myself, so I can't give you any more information than that. You really want to get Ian Crook on here to talk about sounders, because he really knows a great deal and could give you a far better explanation than I could. So we're looking for, predominantly we're looking for arches on their own. I mean, my view is prey shoals are good, but I don't catch Zander in the middle of prey shoals. And so looking for the prey shoals and then fishing the area around them and looking for those arches which are tight to the bottom. That's sort of what gets the old juices flowing when you see them coming up and you think, this is a good area for Zander. But to be honest, with the finder that I currently have, I'd say 75% of the fish I catch I haven't seen on the finder. They're dead on the bottom, really tight too, and then your lure's just come across its eye line and it's just reacted. I mean, I had a bloody big rainbow trout on yesterday. I lost it both sides. I saw that on. I saw what I think was that on the finder. A good arch, and then I got a hit, and it's just like, I think it was that fish that I saw. But that doesn't happen too often, to be honest. And I think it wouldn't be something I'd ever look for. If you happen to come across it, excellent. But dead ground produces more fish than anything else for me.
Yeah, right. So they're not like, say, pike or perch that you see stalking a bait school. They just, hang around and wait for something to come to them, then ambush them, do you think?
I think there's a bit of both to it. I've seen some great screenshots that people have taken on Rutland, especially, where you've got a prey shoal and then you've got arches behind it. And I would say, there's fucking millions of Zander in Rutland. So it's a fair chance. But I think if there's two or three, it's probably Zander, or big trout possibly. Of course, you can never forget the trout on these places. But I think in the main, it's probably Zander. But let's face it, until you stick a hook in one, you're never going to know. And that's half the problem with the big reservoirs, to be honest.
The big depths that you're catching them at, Zander suffer from a bit of barotrauma, do they? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, they do, and it's a really dicey one, because how do you deal with it? My view is, if I got a fish with any visible sign of barotrauma, even if it's a bloody big fish, it gets chucked on the measure very quickly and then it just goes back. And there's no weighing, there's no pictures, because it's just, do you really want to look at a picture of Zander and its eyes are 6 inches out of its skull? I mean, come on, it looks awful. And anyone who takes pictures of them like that, I'm sorry, but you really need to have a word with yourself. Get the fish up as quick as you can. None of this play them up slowly. You get that fish up as quick as you can. You get the hooks out of it. If it's showing barotrauma, then it just goes straight back down. But it all depends. I mean, a mate of mine, AD, we had a great day on Grafham in October, and we were fishing really shallow water, and we had a fish gas up on us, and we couldn't get it to go back down. It had so much gas trapped inside it, so we gave it a bit of a poke with a baiting needle in its vent, and that did the job eventually. But that was in 20 foot of water. I mean, it wasn't deep, and so and to be honest, I mean, on Rutland, you can fish 80 foot and you can bring these Zander up and they don't show any sign of barotrauma at all. And in fact, on Rutland, I've seen far less evidence of barotrauma than I have on Grafham. I mean, admittedly, I fish Grafham a bit more than Rutland, but I think the bigger the fish, the worse it seems to be.
That's my experience. So have a baiting needle on board or a skewer or something, just to give them a poke in the vent, because that can free the gas. If there's no visible sign, like the eyes popping up or the swim bladder, but they won't go back down, they've gassed up. And so a poke with that, try and free the gas. That's a really good way to do it. And at the end of the day, whilst it sounds a bit mental, if they're not going back down, then they're not swimming back down, they're going to die, because there's nothing there's nothing you can do. If that is the case and they're not swimming back down, those fish are going to die. Give them a bit of a poke with a baiting needle. A, it gives them a better chance of life. B, you're not going to kill them doing it. And I mean, it's a rarity to get one which gasses up like that. It's only happened to me 2 or 3 times in 5 years, but it's always the way. It's always on the big fish that it seems to happen.
Yeah, okay.
But certainly with the swim bladder out through the mouth, or the eyes sort of poking out the skull, just get them back. Those fish have got to go back down really quite quickly. Otherwise, it's not fair on the fish. I mean, don't want to go to the fish welfare, but if they're showing like that, and you take a photo with them, I mean, Jesus, I can't see the point.
It doesn't look good for anyone.
It doesn't look good for anyone, and it doesn't look good for the fishery. And we're saying by promoting these photos that it's fine to do that. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I had a fish out of Grafham last year, and it had the worst barotrauma I'd ever seen. The swim bladder was coming out through the gills, the eyes were popping out through its, skull. It wasn't even a particularly deep fish. And I was desperate to get a picture of it because it was black, and I'd never caught a black Zander before. And it went back. It was just like, no, not messing around. Anyway, a mate of mine caught it 2 weeks later. And another mate of mine caught it when I was sharing a boat with him 2 weeks after that. So they do go back down.
Oh, you're joking.
No, it was a really distinctive fish. It was almost jet black, and it had a hell of a scar on its side. And I caught it, and it was straight back down. And Vidar caught it two or 3 weeks later, and then my mate Adi caught it a few weeks after that. So that if they look bad, the quicker you get them back down again, the more chance they've got of survival. And it shows that you're not killing them all. You're not killing them all at all by bringing them up through the depths. But if I'd have weighed that fish and then taken a lot of photographs with it, would it have survived? I'm not 100% convinced myself, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, mate. I used to have this bit of a rig that I'd use when I was out sea fishing back home in deep water, where you'd have quite a large weight with a large hook attached to the side of it, with the hook pointing down, and you debarb the hook, and on the bend of the hook you tie on a long piece of fishing line or whatever, and then when you've got a fish that's suffering barotrauma at the surface, you hook it onto his lip, lower him all the way down to the bottom, give him a quick tug, so it essentially runs the fish all the way back down to the bottom, and his body decompresses and gets back down to where he was. And then you bring your weight back up with no fish. So whether that really works and decompresses them, or it's just out of sight, out of mind, I don't know. But it's according to science, it worked for me.
We've tried it, actually. Funny you should say that. We've tried the same sort of thing a few times. I mean, the problem is when you've got a 12-pound Zander, you need a lot of weight to get that down there.
I think I had a weight that was about half a kilo.
Yeah, that's what you need. You need a heavy weight. We've experimented on another venue we fish. We just got pike, perch, and Zander in it, and the perch suffer more than the Zander and the pike do.
Oh, okay.
To the point where it was just like the perch are going belly up more than anything else. And what Adi did was he got a couple of shopping baskets and cut the end off one and cable tie them together, and then put them on a rope. And the shopping baskets, so you put the fish back on the water, and then drop the basket over the top. The basket sinks down on the rope.
Yep.
You get the fish back sort of down to the bottom, and then just wind the basket back up. And as you say, whether it's out of sight, out of mind, we don't know. But we never saw a fish come back up after using that. I mean, it's a long way to float back up, but something like that. But unfortunately, on Grafham especially, with the shrimp that they've got in there, you can't put anything in the water that can go somewhere else because of the risk of contaminating other venues. Although I think it's unavoidable anyway, to be honest, eventually, that those shrimp are just they're going to get everywhere. I mean, that sounds a bit defeatist, but I mean, I think they're in Rutland now. They're certainly in Pittsford, and no one knows really how they got into Grafham, as far as I'm aware. And I mean, you've got birds, you've got anglers' equipment, and they're trying to say on the anglers' equipment, you know, you can't put stuff in like the ropes which the shrimps can go on, and then you can go and put them take them somewhere else. And I sort of think it's a good idea, but it does sort of hinder your opportunity to try out sort of experimenting with these release techniques if you can't take your own ropes and stuff like that on.
Yeah, well, if you just got a sinker and a hook and some monofilament line, I guess it's worth a try, but
it's certainly worth a go.
There's no doubt, unless they destroy all that reservoir and kill every shrimp in it, that they're going to end up everywhere else. I actually I was working for a pontoon company down in Somerset or Somerville. One of them's the county and one of them's a town. Somerset, it was. And I was working for this pontoon company, and they had all these large plastic pontoons in their yard that had been there for 6 months, I think they figured out at the end. And they'd been destroyed in a flooding incident. And we were going to use them for something else. And I was cutting these specific holes in them for this job. And these pontoons had been sitting in their yard for 5 or 6 months. I cut a hole in it. There was about half an inch of water in the bottom. And sitting down there was a signal crayfish about 4 inches long. And the only way to get inside the pontoon was a crack in the side of it. There was about, I don't know, a centimetre wide. So he must have got in there when he was a tiny little baby and it's been sitting in there for 5 months living off algae or God knows what. But that's how easily these things can spread from one waterway to the other. So even the Zander, they're in the reservoirs down there. They're going to spread through the whole country eventually.
Well, they're going through the country one way or other by hook or by crook as well, I think, to be honest. Now they're quite a desirable species. They do seem to be turning up everywhere. But, yeah, that's it. I mean, nature finds a way, as, what was it, Jurassic Park said that, didn't it? But it's like, you know, you got something which is going to be attached to a bird. You know, the Great Ooze is, 4 miles from where Grafham is, I suppose, as the crow flies?
Yeah.
Probably not even 4 miles, to be honest. It's probably not even that far. I mean, you've got to say that those shrimp are going to end up in the river there, and then the river's going to flood, and the shrimp are going to end up in another lake, and then more birds will, you know, yada, 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 yada. And it's a difficult one, but I understand it from their point of view is they've got to be seen to be doing the best of their abilities to stop the spread.
Oh,
so
yeah, that's right. As far as invasive species are involved, I'm all for getting rid of them.
Well, apart from Zander, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, God, that's a whole nother episode.
Oh, God, yeah, we could be there for weeks on that one.
Well, righto, James, I've kept you long enough, mate. Thanks so much for coming on here and giving away all your tricks and tips. If you want to give a shout out to anyone, now's the time. Or if you've got any mates who have had some blanks recently and you want to rub their noses in it, just fire away, mate.
Oh, it's really hard to say anything derogatory about people who are blanking when I can't really catch fish at the moment. So I'll be nice and leave those guys. I'll give them one this time, and then I'll save it until I've actually caught something, and then next time I might throw some shad at some people. But no, it's been crack and beyond, and hopefully we'll do it again in the future.
Yeah, good on you, mate. Sounds like we've got plenty more to talk about, and I hope you had a good time. We'll see you down the line.
See you soon, Dean. Thanks, buddy.
What they say now, what they say now.
well, there you have it. That's my chat with James Dobie. He's done a great job qualifying for the event in the Netherlands in, I believe it's June 2017. Anyway, we've hatched a bit of a plan, and hopefully we can do a bit of a live broadcast and catch up with James and Mike while they're over there and get some competition updates. So stay tuned for that when it comes around. Apart from that, thanks for listening. Thanks for all the great feedback, and if you've got anything you want to hear on the podcast, make sure you hit me up. But apart from that, tight lines to everyone, and sit tight while I try and scratch up another episode for you. But until then, catch you later.